Welcome to this final installment in the Trails in the Sky FC story summaries. We'll begin right where we left off at the end of Chapter 2, with our adventures in Rouen drawing to a close. It's time to head onwards to the Zeiss region next, so let's dive right in. Chapter 3 begins right where we left off with Agate. He's just subdued the men in black and is about to take them in for questioning when their superior shows up to save them. This man in the red mask is much more skilled than his subordinates, and can even see right through Agate's tough guy facade. Now, the Bracer sure doesn't appreciate this guy's psychological assessment of him, though even his strongest blow is nothing to an opponent who's mastered the body split craft. Whatever that actually means. Before the Red Masked Man fades further into the forest, he tells Agate that to live as a man, he must forego all anger and grief. The phrase that has the redhead screaming with those exact emotions into the high heavens. Now back to Estelle and Joshua, Chloe sees them off at the entrance of the Chaldea Tunnel, which connects the Rouen region to Zeiss. The Genis Academy student thanks the two for teaching her how to be brave, and for helping her figure out what she must do regarding her own situation. The truth is, their confrontation with Mayor Dalmore reminded her of how she's actually been using her time at the orphanage and Genis as a way to selfishly run from her own reality. So with that said, she says she'll be visiting her relatives in Gransel in about a month's time for the Queen's birthday, meaning the three teens can look forward to meeting again soon. Estelle and Joshua happen upon a sweet little girl who's in a big hurry. Now, seeing how there are dangerous monsters down here, the bright kids follow after her to a broken Orbolite. And it's a good thing they did, because otherwise Tita would have become lunch for a pack of monsters. Anyway, it turns out Tita is an apprentice at the central factory and had noticed from the computer database that this Orbolite is actually a defective unit. So once she's repaired it, she accompanies Estelle and Joshua back to Zeiss. It turns out to be a good thing we have her with us, since she helps the country bumpkin Estelle navigate through Zeiss Central Factory, or ZCF for short, right to the entrance of the city. Tita has to get back to her work though, which leaves Estelle and Joshua free to report to the Zeiss Guild branch. The branch manager Kilika is totally on top of everything, having had our branch reassignment forms ready and waiting. She also writes a letter of introduction for us to Factory Chief Murdoch, who we head off to see next. It turns out he's well acquainted with Cassius, so we have him take a look at the Black Orb Mint. Now, what bothers Chief Murdoch most is that there's no inscribed caliber on it, an otherwise staple step in the industry since orb mints were first discovered and constructed 50 years ago. Though, after taking a look at the accompanying letter, the chief knows just who to send us to next. Professor R here obviously refers to Professor Russell, one of Epstein's disciples and the grandfather of orb mints in Liberl. Chief Murdoch phones for Russell's granddaughter, meaning we're reunited with little Tita again. She takes us to her home in Zeiss and attempts to introduce us to her grandfather, but we may as well not exist, seeing how he completely blows past Estelle to continue working on his newest invention. Even Tita briefly forgets about our existence once her grandfather's contraption catches her attention, so the Brights become unwitting assistants to their experimental test runs for a while, until the Russells snap out of their techie trance. Anyway, after proper introductions, the professor deems a measurement scan a necessary first step, since it'll let us understand the exact function of this Black Orb Mint. However, the actual scan sets off an ominous chain of events, one that shuts down all the Orbal tech in Zeiss, leading to an entire citywide blackout and a ton of panicked citizens. The professor initially refuses to halt the scan until the exact readings are complete, but news of this disaster forces his hand. Thankfully, all the lights resume function the second the scan is abandoned, though this also means we've failed to get any proper readings at all on the black orbment. Professor Russell just finishes coining the effects, the orbital shutdown phenomenon, when an irate Chief Murdoch barges in. Apparently, this isn't the first time Professor Russell's experiments have ended in unintended widespread consequences, though technically this time wasn't entirely his fault. Then in the morning, Professor Russell attempts to cut open the black orbment with an orbital-powered saw, but the same shutdown phenomenon makes the tool cease all function whenever it gets close. But if orbital-powered technology won't work, then perhaps some old-school tech will. Thanks to an otherwise silly comment by Estelle, Professor Russell speculates that a combustion engine, which runs on gasoline, should do the trick. We find the gasoline down in the basement, and very fortunately for us, Maintenance Chief Gustav has only just received the combustion engine this morning after it had been on loan to the military for a good while prior. Keep this info in mind, by the way. Back at ZCF, the combustion-powered saw works without a hitch, though this lets us see just how tough the black orbment shell is. All that punishment from the saw barely left a scratch on it, but before we can resume the experiment with more saws, Chief Murdoch comes in with an urgent request for the professor. The pump that powers the hot springs in nearby Elmo Village has broken down, and since they rely heavily on tourism, they'll be suffering a major blow financially if it's not fixed ASAP. It runs on very old machinery though, stuff that many of the younger engineers at ZCF have no inkling about. So it looks like the professor may be the only one who'd know how to fix it, until Tita steps up, saying she remembers watching her grandpa repair the pump before. He volunteers to go in his stead, and since Estelle and Joshua are free to provide escort to the village, there's no reason for the professor to turn his granddaughter down. Once in Elmo, Tita gets started on repairs right away after introducing us to the owner of the inn. Meanwhile, we get wind that a visitor was seen leaving the village without any proper escort. We come to find that it's none other than our airheaded friend Dorothy, so thank goodness she has us to save her butt. The pump for the hot springs is all fixed up by the time we return to Elmo, and it's definitely getting late. So Mrs. Mao has us stay the night at the hot springs resort, free of charge. While soaking in the female indoor bath, Tita tests some uncharted waters and asks Estelle if she and Joshua are married. Estelle denies it, of course, though the direction this conversation has taken puts a lot of the stuff that's happened on this junior bracer journey so far in a new light. Beyond flustered, Estelle dashes outside to the open-air bath, not realizing that it's unisex. Her shriek as a result of finding Joshua out here startles the whole damn village. And in the aftermath, the bright pair starts an argument, though thankfully Tita's presence quells their irritation. It turns out she's an only child and her parents have always been working abroad, so Tita's only ever had her grandpa as family. So she can't help but feel a little envious when viewing Estelle and Joshua's interactions. So all is good when the two bracers choose to adopt her as their honorary little sis. Then the next morning, the three, along with Dorothy, make the return trip to Zeiss just as a terrible commotion is breaking out at the central factory. Smoke pours from the doors as all the workers rush out of the building. It doesn't seem like a fire was started, but it's worrisome nonetheless, especially when Professor Russell remains unaccounted for. So the three of us make it to the third floor workshop, though there's still no signs or clues of Tita's grandfather. There is an Agate though. Yup, Agate's in town and helps us chase after the men in black who we find to have taken Professor Russell hostage. But not only do we completely lose them, but we come to learn that these men must have changed into Royal Guardsman uniforms while they took the elevator to the ground floor. So not only did they manage to escape without drawing any of the workers' suspicions outside, though albeit they were carrying an oddly large black bag. But they've also set the stage for implicating the Royal Guard as terrorists in the coming chapter. But now's not the time for that part of Sky FC yet. Captain Amalthea collects Dorothy's photo quartz as evidence since she was the one who snapped a picture of those supposed Royal Guardsmen leaving the factory. Now, once the Intelligence Division has left, we get started on our own investigation. Professor Elba points us to the suspicious figures he saw at the Cornelia Tower, and though Tita begs us to let her come with us, Agate's not one to mince words and says she'll only get in the way, leaving her running off in tears. This is tough for Estelle to accept, but there's no time to waste. Agate, Estelle, and Joshua go confront the special ops guys at the top of the tower, and once again, these guys are honestly some of the toughest opponents in the game. They manage to buy just enough time for their ride to swoop in, so the Bracers wait for the opportune moment to rush them while they're busy hoisting the professor onto the ship. But Tita's impromptu arrival ruins everything. Agate is forced to take a bullet for her, which gives these shady guys just enough time to get away with her grandfather. Now, Estelle thinks Agate takes things too far when he slaps Tita in the aftermath, but he wants to make sure it's clear as day that her actions are what cost them the entire rescue operation. If she really wants to take responsibility for her mistake, then she can't just sit and cry here. It's this tough dose of reality that ends up being what Tita needs after all, seeing how it gives her the resolve to move forward. The bullet that grazed Agate earlier was actually laced with a dangerous neurotoxin though, which lands him in a coma. So we pay a visit to Father Vixen and ask if there are any special church remedies to treat this grave condition. He needs an ingredient called Zemurian moss to concoct a relevant treatment, one that won't counteract the poison itself, but will strengthen Agate's own body in fighting it. Now, given how this ingredient grows in a dangerous area, we're really lucky that Zin, an experienced bracer from Calvard, has time to lend us his help. Unfortunately for Agate, though, the trade-off of fighting the poison is pure agony. Tita watches over him that night and is confused when he calls her Misha in his delirious state. Then when morning comes around, we learn that the military has called off inspections throughout the country, despite no news that the kidnappers have been caught. On top of that, Dorothy managed to snap a shot of the same compact airship that we saw at Cornelia Tower, entering Leyston Fortress. This is really suspicious news, and Major Sid doesn't do much to alleviate our concerns when we pay them a visit. But their trouble with the massive orbital door, as well as their response to it, essentially confirms that they have the Black Orb Mint in their possession. Now, there is some good news once we get back to the guild. Agate is feeling fine and dandy again, and there's an actual loophole for getting around the non-interference policy the Bracers have with matters of government and military. Since Professor Russell is a civilian, and the Bracers' first and foremost priority is the safety of the people, we have grounds for getting involved in this situation. The plan we come up with involves sneaking into the fortress under the guise of a regular maintenance check by the ZCF ship, the Leibniz. It turns out the equipment Professor Russell was working on that first day we met him was a jammer for biosensors, meaning we'll be able to stow away in the cargo and bypass the machines used to scan for any life forms attempting to enter the fortress. And even though Agate's not happy about it, Tita will play a vital role in our group, since only she knows how to operate the jamming device. Also, on the flight there, she catches Agate off guard when she asks him who Misha is. All he really says is that he hasn't seen her in a long time, and nothing more will be said on this topic until Sky SC. Now, at the fortress, we have a mini heart attack when one of the soldiers' biosensors picks up some readings. though thankfully it was just a ruse placed by the maintenance chief in the form of ZCF's beloved feline Antoine. Anyway, thanks to the map Kilika procured, we make a beeline to the research wing and manage to catch Colonel Richard right in the act. He wants Professor Russell to figure out how exactly to control the Black Orbment, or the Gospel as he refers to it. Richard explains that this kind of power will bring liberal prosperity like it's never seen before. Meanwhile, the man who bested Agate earlier shows up to report on their successful operation in the capital. So with that, Colonel Richard and his subordinates return to Gransel, leaving us with the perfect opportunity to rush in and rescue the professor. Though Tita's grandpa breaks the bad news that his research here has already made steady progress towards controlling the Black Orbment, meaning the military will soon have the power to replicate the orbital shutdown effect whenever and wherever they wish. Not only that, but the soldiers we thought were knocked out pull the alarm on us, which really throws a wrench in our escape plans. Since we can no longer get to the wharf, we're forced to search for another way out, and while we're on the lookout, we happen upon some familiar faces down in the dungeons. But obviously we're not inclined to sit and chat for long. Major Sid actually ends up being our saving grace, first by revealing confidential intel about the Liberalian military's current predicament, what with the military's top brass either been kept to silence via blackmail or having been imprisoned for disagreeing, like in General Morgan's case. Furthermore, the Royal Guard has been officially arrested for treason thanks to the photographic evidence provided a la Dorothy's courts. Lastly, Major Sid urges us to escape via the secret passage known only to the COs of Lyston Fortress. Now, once we're officially out of that place, we make the difficult decision to split up. It'll be easier for Agate and the Russells to avoid detection the smaller their numbers are. Meanwhile, Estelle and Joshua are entrusted with an important mission in the professor's stead. He asks us to go to Gransel and seek an audience with the Queen. She absolutely must be informed about Richard's plans to use the gospel in the capital city. So with this new mission entrusted to us, thus ends Sky FC's Chapter 3. But at last we've arrived at the final chapter, which starts off with a number of tense scenes. Chloe and First Lieutenant Julia are confronted by Colonel Richard and his Special Ops forces on their way to Gransel. And remember how Olivier admitted to looking for Cassius Bright at the end of Chapter 1? Well, judging from his intel, Cassius is currently in Erebonia investigating the recent attacks on the Imperial Bracer guilds. As for Estelle and Joshua, they narrowly avoid capture by the military inspections at the Sanctine Gate, only thanks to Professor Alba's quick improv. We escort him to the capital city and head to the Bracer Guild once we've parted ways. And there, we report the true state of affairs involving the military to Elnan. Then we pose as tourists at the castle to gather more intel. The main takeaways are that the Queen is said to be ill from all this stress, which has left that Duke Dunan in charge of the castle. Though the Duke is only responsible for overseeing the martial arts tournament, really. In actuality, it's Colonel Richard who's currently handling all matters of governance. Since there's really nothing else we can do at the moment, we decide to keep an eye on Duke Dunan via watching the tourney's preliminary rounds. The All-Bracer team easily secures a spot for the main competition, as does Zin, despite fighting solo against 4 opponents. But truly, it's a good thing we came, since we hear that the grand prize is an invitation to a celebratory dinner at the Royal Castle. Now, with the encouragement of the All-Bracer team, we plan on joining Zin so we can have our own shot at that championship prize. The guard at the Calvert Embassy tells us that Zin likes to train on the Herb Scenic route, so we head on over to look for him, and surprisingly stumble upon a sister from the church. Zin shows up just in time to help us take out the encroaching monsters, Though before he gets a real chance to hit on Sister Ellen, some Intelligence Division soldiers notice the commotion and tell us to disperse. Zin meets with us at the cafe and quite easily takes to the idea of forming a 3-person team for the tournament, though it'd be in our best interest to find a 4th member as well, and that's where Olivier comes in. He's overheard our conversation and offers to join us since he has nothing taking up his time at the moment. Zin can actually tell Olivier is a skilled firearms user just from the way he carries himself, though let's be real here, Orbital Arts is his real specialty. So aside from Olivier's typical shenanigans, it's a breeze getting registered as Zin's teammates once the next day comes around. Our opponents are quite the surprise though, them being the Ravens from back in Rouen, and even though they take the loss, they're clearly stronger than they were before. The surprises don't end here though. Thanks to Duke Dunan's influence, the Sky Bandits have been allowed the opportunity to compete. The Intelligence Division is also fielding a tough team, led by the guy in the red mask, Lieutenant Lawrence. He's easily the most formidable opponent so far, and his sword style leaves Joshua incredibly shaken, though he's quickly able to brush it off. That evening, Niall shows up looking for us. He's hoping to find some intel that hasn't gone through the military first, you see. He's heard a little about the Zeiss kidnapping from Dorothy, and is beginning to put 2 and 2 together that Colonel Richard has been manipulating things right from the start. After all, he wasn't well known until after Niall did that story on him and the Sky Bandits' capture. And so we agree to tell him the whole story as long as he keeps it off record. In return, Niall promises to dig up as much as he can on Richard, Amalthea, and Lawrence, so we'll know who we're dealing with. The next day, we enter the left side waiting room and come face to face with the Capuas again. It turns out Duke Dunan offered them a deal of lightening their sentence the better they do. Plus, they make sure Estelle and Joshua know that they did us a huge favor, since they decided to keep quiet about seeing us in Leiston Fortress last chapter. Anyway, they definitely have the biggest score to settle with the Intelligence Division after they threw them under the bus. Our team manages to best the other Bracer team and secure a spot in the finals, meaning our opponents will be whoever wins this next round. Unfortunately for the Capuas, they're unable to get their sweet revenge on the Special Ops guys, though in a surprise tsundere outburst, Josette leaves the Intelligence Division's defeat in our hands. Then the Sky Bandits are led back to where they were imprisoned. That evening, Niall gives us what info he did scrounge up on the Intelligence Division bigwigs, the most mysterious individual being this Lawrence Belgar. There's no information on his age, nationality, or really anything, aside from the fact that he's originally from the Jester Jaeger Corps, a name Joshua feels like he's heard before. It also appears that Colonel Richard has been looking for arranged marriage candidates for the Queen's orphaned granddaughter, Princess Claudia. That night, a letter left in our hotel room draws us out to the cathedral. Here we find that the sister we helped earlier was actually Lieutenant Schwartz in disguise. She entrusts us with a letter addressed to the head maid at the castle, which will let her know that Estelle and Joshua can be trusted to meet with the Queen. With that, we escape out the back door and take a breather on the benches outside the department store. Joshua and Estelle make each other a huge promise in this moment. Once this whole situation is settled and Cassius returns safely, Joshua promises to tell Estelle about his past, which psychs her up. So in return, she promises to tell him what's been on her mind lately, and none of those special ops guys are gonna keep them from having this talk. The next day, the stadium is absolutely packed, with even Professor Alba in attendance. The other Bracers are spectating as well, though Kurt has been feeling lightheaded all morning. He's been getting fuzzy flashbacks of a botched job from a couple months before, one that he can't actually remember much of at all. Anyway, it comes time for the final match of the tourney to begin. Joshua attempts to ask Lawrence about his sword style, though the full question dies on his lips. But we manage to eke out the win. Back in the other team's room, it's revealed that Colonel Richard had personally asked Lawrence to hold back, if not outright throw the match. It does them well as special ops soldiers not to reveal their entire hand after all. It's too late for the Bracers to stir things up anyway, seeing how their plan is already at 90% completion. Now, unfortunately for Olivier, his pal Major Vander drags him back to the Erebonian embassy, fearing that the bard's antics at a high-profile dinner like this could cause an international scandal, especially considering the strained relationship that exists between Liberl and Erebonia already. So then there were three. We're shown to our opulent room in the castle, then before we go looking for the head maid, we say a quick hello to each of Liberl's mayors. Afterwards, we go snooping around and eventually find the entrance to the royal keep. It was a good call to come here since we're able to catch Maid Hilda right as she's making her way back to the main castle. We discreetly slip her Julia's letter, and so we're led to the maid's quarters to discuss things further. Learning of our dire need to speak with the queen, she starts brainstorming a plan to get us into the royal keep and requests we return here after the party is over. Colonel Richard joins us at the table for dinner and actually has a host of shocking news to share with Liberl's leaders. One is that the queen has apparently decided to abdicate the throne and has chosen the Duke as her successor. She selected him over her granddaughter Claudia as she believes she's still rather young to lead the country. Instead, it appears that she's interested in finding a suitor for her, what with a number of foreign royals already expressing interest. This is all hard to take in for the mayors, and ideally they'd like to meet with the queen to hear the news from Her Majesty herself, but Colonel Richard assures them that she'll publicly announce all of this at her birthday celebration in a few days. Now, Zin can't help but be puzzled as to why Richard felt it necessary to disclose such consequential news about the kingdom in the presence of a foreigner such as himself. But Richard states that they've wanted the guild to know ahead of time as well. After dinner, Colonel Richard happens upon us before we can return to Maid Hilda. He's learned that we are Cassius Bright's children since the last time we've met, and he'd very much like to speak with us, so we sit down with him in the lounge. It turns out that he was assigned to Cassius's unit shortly after graduating from the military academy, and during his service, it wasn't hard to see Cassius Bright as none other than a pure genius in both tactics and combat, especially during the 100 Days' War, in which Liberl would have crumbled under the Empire's might if it weren't for Cassius and his incredible strategy. But since he refused a medal from the Queen and retired from the army right after the war, few people outside the military know of his incredible achievements. Anyway, meeting with us tonight has helped him see that perhaps Cassius had made the right decision for himself when he left the army, even though Richard did everything at the time to convince him to stay. With that, the colonel ominously mutters that he can now proceed with no regrets. Then he takes his leave. Afterwards, Hilda has us dressed as maids in order to get into the royal keep, much to Estelle's delight and poor Joshua's chagrin. We get to pass on Professor Russell's message at last, and so Queen Alicia shares that 10 years ago, some orbital readings were detected underneath the castle. It was located deep underground, much deeper than the sewers in fact, so Professor Russell was sent to investigate. He speculated that it must be some ancient relic, an artifact of Zemuria's ancient civilization, but there was no way to determine its exact nature or location. This information was kept strictly confidential, of course, so she has no idea how or where the colonel could have heard about this. She also takes the opportunity to finally tell Estelle more about how her father saved Liberal all those years ago, and also how his very strategy still weighs heavily on him, since he couldn't be there during his beloved wife's final moments given his position. So he quit the army and became a family man so something like that would never happen again. With that said, as the kingdom's ruler, Queen Alicia already feels responsible for the Bright family's loss, and she couldn't bear to see Estelle come to harm while Cassius is away. Therefore, she asks us not to involve ourselves any further in these dangerous affairs. But we share about the people we've met, and the places we've been to during our entire Junior Bracer journey. All things that have become dear to our hearts. Much like how Cassius and the military fought for Liberal's peace all those years ago, so do we wish to protect that peace. And so, wishing to respect our resolve, the Queen officially submits a request to the Guild. She asks us to rescue all those who are being held hostage at the Herb Royal Villa. This includes Princess Claudia. You see, despite what the Colonel claimed, Queen Alicia's wish is for her granddaughter to succeed her, given the Duke's numerous character flaws. Richard and his faction hold on to a very misogynistic belief that a woman succeeded by yet another woman would be seen as weak in the tense political landscape of Zemuria. And so, the Colonel and Duke Dunin have conspired together to stage this coup. It's already past midnight by the time we return to the castle, and Captain Amalthea questions us on what business we would have going in and out of the maid's quarters. Now, thankfully, a completely wasted Zin shows up just in time to drive her away, though once we're back in our room, we learn that he wasn't drunk at all. He was just using some Eastern breathing technique to make his face appear red to better sell the act. Another crazy revelation is piled on tonight when Zin hands us the letter he received from Cassius a while ago. It asked him if he could travel to Liberal under the guise of the martial arts tournament in order to keep an eye on things while he's still in Erebonia. He also asked Zin to bail out his kids in only the worst case scenario. And so, here we are. We let Zin in on everything that's happened so far, and he officially gets on board to help. Meanwhile, that night, Lieutenant Lawrence has led Colonel Richard and his forces to the ancient space underneath the castle. Just a little more, and they'll have Liberal's future secured. The next day, we go about assembling all the Groundsel Bracers to help us fulfill the Queen's request. Zin also helps Kurt recover from some of the amnesia he's had about the incident 3 months prior. He took the black orbment from those men in black back then, making him the case signed on that package we received all that time ago. Anyway, with Julia Schwarz and the remaining Royal Guard, we now have the adequate numbers to field teams for decoy, ambush, and rescue purposes. And so that night, it's Estelle who gets to sound off the order, given that she was the one who accepted the Queen's request. Julia's team and the Bracers force large amounts of the intelligence division out from the villa by attacking their skeleton crews in the surrounding areas. A final small group of Royal Guard distract the ID forces that remain in the courtyard, giving the rescue team of Zin, Estelle, and Joshua the chance to sneak into the villa. There aren't many personnel left to oppose us, so it doesn't take long to reach the hostages. Now, it takes Estelle a good bit to put 2 and 2 together, but she eventually comes to understand that her friend Chloe is, in fact, the Princess Claudia. Chloe was just a nickname that Jill came up with by taking bits from her full name, Claudia von Auslese. It seems we've spoken for too long, though, when some Special Ops officers grab General Morgan's grandkid and hold her at gunpoint. They're willing to do something as despicable as this if it would help them achieve the dream that the entire intelligence division has been working towards all this time. But unfortunately for them, the crazy, straight-out-of-nowhere duo of Shara and Olivier arrive to save the day. We can't celebrate for too long, though, considering how easy it would be for the intelligence division from other regions to encircle the villa and brand them all as traitors. So Chloe suggests going on the offensive once more and rescuing the queen. The plan is to have a stealth team of Joshua, Ollie, and Zin infiltrate the castle via the underground sewers in order to reach the control panel that will open the castle gates. Meanwhile, the Royal Guard and Bracers will stage a frontal assault on the castle, which will force the troops inside to confront them. Finally, since we've secured one of the Intelligence Division patrol ships, and given that Chloe was taught how to pilot one, this leaves her, Estelle, and Shara free to land in front of the Royal Keep to liberate Queen Alicia. And so, everything goes just as planned, much to Captain Amalthea's dismay. Though the final opponent between us and the Queen is the formidable Lieutenant Lawrence. He has a whole host of otherworldly metaphors to describe the nature of power and politics. Then he removes his helmet and easily subdues all three of the women. But the strangest comment is one he saves for Queen Alicia. In response to her attempts to sympathize with him, he says that as someone who knows the name of Hamel, she has no right to extend him her pity. Lastly, he warns us that Richard is already in the castle's depths, before he leaps off the castle's balcony and supposedly into the lake, though the water's surface remains completely undisturbed. So just who was he really? But anyway, time is of the essence. Remember that stuff about the Septarians that Professor Alba mentioned all the way back in the prologue? Well, it looks like the stories are actually true. Back then, the goddess Adios gifted these 7 treasures to humanity, which allowed them to control nature itself. Apparently one such treasure, the Aureole, nicknamed the Shining Ring, sleeps underneath the castle. But it was considered so dangerous that the Liberalian royalty decided it must be sealed away. So it looks like the true intent of Richard's coup was to gain access to the castle long enough to unearth this ancient power. Now, thankfully, Agate, Tita, and Professor Russell have made it to Gransel just in time, since the latter of the three is able to bypass the elevator's security. Queen Alicia and Julia leave Richard to us, since they must hold off the castle from the Intelligence Division reinforcements amassing from other regions. So, down in the vast underground labyrinth, we finally find the Colonel in front of a strange device. We get to hear straight from his own mouth the worries of the Intelligence Division. Liberal is a minuscule country compared to its neighbors, and the only thing that's saving it from another invasion is its technological superiority. But even that won't last forever, and they can no longer rely on Cassius Bright's genius, since he's no longer part of the military. But it's Joshua's questions that really stem the flow of this conversation. How did Richard come to know about the Aureole, something that only the royal family should know about? And where did he acquire the Gospel, an artifact that's more state-of-the-art than even the finest ornaments from the central factory? These questions clearly trouble the Colonel, since just like so many others, he also can't remember how he's arrived at this information. He simply just believed that the Aureole would be here, and that the Black Orbment would allow him to control it. But Richard declares, what of it? It shouldn't matter how he got here, just that he's made it here at all. Look at this place. This is all the proof he needs that the power he seeks is real. He buys enough time for the Gospel to activate the device, but what releases isn't the Aureole, but a massive talking archaism, calling itself the Ring Guardian Reverie. And even though the party manages to bring it down, it just won't stay down. That's when Richard surprises us, attempting to fight it alone so that we can escape from here. But the real hero ends up being none other than the one man everyone has been talking about all game, Mr. Cassius Bright. Aside from the happy family reunion at long last, we learn that General Morgan and Major Sid are handling everything up on the surface. It looks like with the combined efforts of so many people, Liberal is slowly beginning to smooth over this conspiracy. And yet, Colonel Richard still refuses to let go of his hero worship of Cassius, earning him a swift blow from the man. How can he still fail to see that it was the combined efforts of himself, General Morgan, and the rest of the Liberalian military that led to their victory during the war 10 years ago? Hearing it come straight from Cassius's mouth finally seems to get through to Richard just how wrong he's been. And with that, the coup is successfully thwarted. A week later, the Queen makes her first public appearance in a while at her 60th birthday celebration. As for Liberal's Bracer Guild, it's quite the bittersweet time. Estelle and Joshua receive their final recommendation and are officially promoted to senior bracer status. But on the other hand, their dad submits his official resignation since he'll be rejoining the military to help them sort out things post-coup attempt. They've also figured out where Richard got that black orb mint. Lieutenant Lawrence gave it to him when he was first recruited into the intelligence division. But it's time for Joshua and Estelle to have their much-deserved break. However, Professor Alba approaches Joshua, who's sitting all alone, while Estelle is grabbing some ice cream. Joshua's instincts about this man turn out to be right. It was Professor Alba, or more like Wiseman the Faceless, one of the 7 Anguis of Ouroboros, who was behind everyone's memory lapses all along. Not only that, but he reveals that Joshua was the entire reason this whole first stage of the Society's plan went off without a hitch. You see, over the many years he was a part of the Bright household, he was made to report on Cassius's schedule and the Bracer Guild's dealings. Then, his memory would be wiped each time before returning home. So yes, it was only thanks to Joshua that Cassius was successfully led out of Liberal, giving Richard the chance to stage his coup. Lastly, Wiseman makes sure Joshua knows that he's an absolute monster, a human weapon, and his greatest creation ever, the Black Fang. He'll never belong with normal people, so he's free to rejoin the Society whenever he finally realizes that. So Joshua, even after being shaken to his very core at these revelations, collects himself and appears calm as ever afterwards. Or well, he seems that way to everyone except Estelle. Then that night, she follows the sound of his harmonica to where he's waiting on the garden terrace. Then it's here and now that Joshua finally tells Estelle about his past. One day, something terrible happened that completely shattered his heart. He forgot how to feel, how to eat, and no matter what his caretaker did, Joshua only grew weaker day by day. But one day, a wandering magician claimed that he could heal Joshua's heart, provided he was compensated, of course. And so, as he began to piece this boy's heart back together, the magician found that he could actually shape him into whatever he wished. So this time, Joshua was made into a killer, a skilled assassin who would go on to kill hundreds of people, developing a reputation that'd strike fear in the hearts of men. One day, this Black Fang was given the target of one S-rank bracer and a national hero, Cassius Bright. But he was repelled with as much ease as an adult tiger swatting at a cub. However, Cassius came to his would-be assassin's aid when the Society servants came to finish him off for this botched job. Joshua was then welcomed into the Bright home, where he lived 5 blissful years, like they were some perfect dream. But all dreams must come to an end eventually. Now he vows to find this foul magician and put an end to him. Then Joshua hands Estelle his harmonica. Though before he can leave, she repeats exactly what she said all the way back in the prologue. His heart isn't broken at all. She's seen who he is in both good times and bad. And at last, Estelle confesses her real feelings to Joshua, and what follows may appear like a sweet first kiss for the two, though you'd be horribly mistaken. Joshua actually slipped Estelle a fast-acting sedative. And now it's his turn to confess his own mutual feelings, all while Estelle tries futilely to stay awake. He admits that he's loved her from the first moment they met, then bids her a decisive farewell. So yeah, don't hate me, but this marks the end of Sky First Chapter. Anyway, please like and subscribe if you like this video. I'll be redoing my other Sky summaries from 3 years ago now in the coming months. Also, come join our welcoming Discord community at discord.gg/LadyVirgilia, and also follow me on Twitter and Twitch. Get 10% off Rogue Energy products with my code LadyV, and lastly, I want to thank all my wonderful patrons for their support, especially Jared Breland, Andreas Hansen, Captain Hobo, Big Klingy, Sam Bezjak, Francesco Santoyo Rego, Silverwind847, Sathya Salvaraja, M. Meownalin, Gigi Sora, Platinum Rose, Malcolm Lowry, Killer Ninja 151, Melanie Gutierrez, Unholy Biscuit, Leviathan 8685, and Eden Korsef. Thanks for watching, guys.